Howdy folks, Bluesboy Jag here with yet another cigar box guitar lesson, except it's not, it's a cigar box guitar build. This is the Perez Carillo, not Carillo, Carillo. I made a ton of these. This is a really cool box. I love the shininess. It's shiny, beautiful. It's a good size box. And I believe this is going to be a 4-string. I'll have to double check that before I make it. So I've already got the necks cut. I don't have them fretted. So I've marked where, I don't know if you can see it, but I've marked where the frets are going to be with a pencil. So first thing I'm going to do here is, there you go, you can see the marks there. So first thing I'm going to do is cut the fret slots in it, and then we will proceed from there. So I've got a fancy dancy fret knife right here, and I have a slightly less fancy dancy fret marker. So what I do is I take this fret marker, and I'll have to dislodge this. So I have the fret marker right here, and I've already marked the frets right there. So those pencil marks indicate where the frets will be. So let's get to it. All right, so I've got the neck in the miter box. The miter box is basically just something that holds the neck in place so that I can put the fret slots in. And let's see if I can hold the camera and do this. So this right here is where the knife goes. So I've got all the frets marked on the neck, and this is my fancy, as I showed you earlier, my fancy fret marking device. So basically I just trace this from a regular 25.5 inch neck. I've been doing this for 20 years. These last about a year or two, and then they kind of fall apart, so I make a new one. So what we're going to do here is we clamp the miter box down, and as I indicated before, this is where the knife goes through and cuts the frets. So I've indicated on here where the nut is, which is right there. So I'm going to put a slot there first, and then for every fret mark is another slot all the way up. Pretty straightforward. All right, mission accomplished. Nice and pretty. So the next step is to put the frets in. So I just happen to have some frets down here. Nice big long piece of fret. So we will chop up the fret wire, and we will put the frets in. First thing we do, obviously, is measure where to cut the fret. See if I can do this with one hand. So you put the fret in. Take that part out. So there's one fret. And we'll come back in a minute after we get all the other frets in, and we will dress the frets, which means make them pretty. All right, all the frets are in, and now they just need to be trimmed. Doing this with one hand, holding the phone with the other hand. As I said, this is 25.5-inch scale. You can use a lot of different scales. 25.5 just happens to be a Stratocaster scale. And most people are familiar with that. Some people do a 24.5, which is a Gibson scale for some Gibson guitars. But I just keep it simple with the 25.5. Alright, so we've got the ends trimmed off here. The next thing to do is to sand the edges. So I use this handy dandy sander. It's not really a sander, but I guess it's sort of like a sander. So what I do is run this across the edge, and it gives it a very nice level edge here. You don't want these frets sticking out. Majorly uncomfortable. So the procedure here is to do the edges first. And I use obviously this end right here. So that makes all the frets flush to the edge, as opposed to close to the edge by guess. Probably like what? All right, so now all the frets are flush with the wood, nice and smooth. But the next thing I need to do is smooth out. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. Smooth out the corners of the frets here, because the frets kind of do stick out a little bit. So we do pretty much the same procedure, and we do it like this. And that's a little bit precarious. So I do it the old-fashioned way, just put it on my leg. And now all the frets are nice and smooth. Well, almost. There's one more procedure here. We do the fine tuning. And we use this little doodad. It's sort of a square file, but it's specifically for frets. So with this, we will smooth even more. And if you look close, real close, I don't know if you can see, but they're a little bit rough on the edges here, where they come to the edge of the neck there. So this takes about 3 or 4 minutes. So they do look kind of scratched up, so we'll take care of that in a minute. But if you look close here, the top of the fret is protruding just a little bit, and when you play guitar, it's going to be extremely annoying. So this takes about 30 seconds, but what we do here is we sand right on the top corner here, and that smooths out the edge of the fret. All right, all the fret ends have been smoothed over, and the next step is to shine up the frets themselves. You can see where there's some wear, so we'll make them all spiffy. And I'm using the fine sandpaper with the fancy dancy dealy here, designed specifically for guitar frets. So this only takes a few seconds. You can see where the wear into the fret from installing the frets is on the top there. So we're going to make them all shiny and spiffy. And then after this, we're going to take the the heavy gauge of this same sandpaper, and we're going to use it on the edges of all these frets. This whole process takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes. All right, so we've got the tops of the frets all nice and pretty. And if we angle it so you can see a little bit better here, looks pretty good. So the next step is to take the coarse gauge, which is what that C stands for, and we're going to do the edges just a little bit more. The corners, I guess you would say, corners of the frets where they stick out, because you don't want those corners to rub against your fingers when you're playing guitar. It's just a little bit uncomfortable, so I'm just doing this pretty sparingly. The point is just to simply smooth the edge and not to shape the fret itself on the edge here. We're just kind of smoothing off the corner here, as it were. Like I said, this whole process takes about 10 minutes to put the frets in and sand them. And sometimes I have to go back and do some touch-ups. So right now I'm feeling the edge. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the frets. I'm just sliding to see if they're slippery. That's the term I use, although that's probably not the proper term. So you don't want to squeeze too tight when you're doing this. So I do feel 3 or 4 frets down here that still need to be sanded just a bit. They're just a little bit spiky, as I call it. So we'll do a couple more like this. Just 1 or 2 passes. And we feel it again and see what we get. That feels better. So now I'm going to go back to my fine and do this again. And this also, you can do the edges on this with this sandpaper. I buy this on eBay. They run about $2 or $3 for each doohickey, and I don't know, $1 or $2 for each band of sandpaper. All right, so now I go back to my coarse on the edges, and I just kind of go back and forth. I can see a couple of frets here that need just a bit more. You may not be able to see it with the camera. So we try to get them as smooth and as pretty as we can. Make sure that your sanding strip doesn't slip off the fret and mess up the wood of the fretboard, but that's easily repaired if it does. Just use some super fine grit 400, 500, 800 sandpaper, and it won't take but a second to do that, unless you have several spots, in which case it will take a few minutes. All right, so all the frets are done, and obviously the next thing I do is, maybe not so obviously, I don't know, is I'll put where the fret markers are going to be. So that's going to be 3. So I'm putting a dot on 3, 5, 7, and 9, and then 10, 11, and the double dot on 12. 1, 2, 3, and 5. So those aren't exactly perfect in the exact spot. I'll do that here in just a minute. So the way that I do that is I've got a Dremel bit. And hold on a second and I'll get that Dremel bit. So this doohickey right here is going to punch in a tiny little starting of the fret marker. It's going to be a divot right here, and then I'm going to use this Dremel doohickey, and that's going to make it slightly bigger. So y'all are like, what are you talking about? Well, hold on. So there's my tiny hole maker. You want this pretty slow, so I've got it on 5. Very, very slow. So now I've got the marker right here. So I'm just going to put just a little divot in there. And we'll come back in a minute. And we'll make the fret marker just a little bit more obvious. Can't do this and hold the phone at the same time very well. I'll show you my handiwork here in just a second. There you go. And the next step is to make those slightly bigger. So what we'll do is use a different Dremel. So that's got a rounded tip to it. And keep it real slow. And I just make it slightly bigger. So she said, we'll go there. And that one. And literally just a little bit of pressure is all you need. I would not advise holding a phone in one hand while you do this. A little bit iffy. Alright, so I've got all the fret markers on the top of the neck. Is the edge. Close to the edge down by the river. So I have my marker right here, my fret marker. Don't know if you can see that, there it is. And I just make it just a tiny bit bigger. Just put a little bit of pressure on it. And I'll show you what happens after that. So that's your double dot. And then here is the final. Alright, so the end result of that is fret marker on the 3rd fret, which is barely visible, but that's okay because I'm going to use a marker to make it bigger. Some of these you can't even hardly see in this light. But those fret markers on the edge match the location of the fret markers here. Alright, so the way I do this is very simple and it works beautifully. So the fret marker is actually a paint pen, a black paint pen, and I'm searching for the proper size. So this is very simple, but you have to be very careful, obviously. So I'm just going to put a little tiny dot there, right inside that divot that I made. And I'll go back and I'll clean them up just a bit. That shows me where they are anyway. Now I'm going to put the phone down. I'm going to clean these up just a bit. Make them look all pretty. So there's your fret markers on the front. And then your fret markers on the side. Nice and simple. Been doing this for 20 years and they work great. Because they have a divot, that means that the fingers, when you play the guitar, will not affect the paint. If it does, you can just spot a little bit more with your Sharpie. Alright, the next step is to put the tuner holes in. So I've marked where those will be. It's pretty straightforward. Just going to use a drill and get the ball rolling, and then I'll kind of clean them up after I do that. Alright, I have the tuner holes installed, ready to go, and I also put the logo on there. I use a paint pen for that. And this is your nut right here, which I will take care of that at a later point. And the next step here is to determine, which I've already done, how far the neck goes in. So this is going to be glued to the lid of the box. Actually, I've got the box flipped around the wrong way. So it will be oriented thusly. So that portion of the neck from here to here will be inside, glued to the lid of the box. So I've already determined that. Some of you ask, how do you determine exactly where the neck goes? How far in the neck goes? And I have created one of these fancy, very amazingly intricate, absolutely stunningly beautiful fret marker dealies. So what I do here is mark where the frets are. That's how I determine where the frets were for the neck. And you put the end of this up here where the nut would be, which is that slot right there. And this will help you determine where the bridge is going to be. This is a 25.5-inch scale neck. So what I've done here is marked the end of the neck where the bridge would be, right here. Very fancy. So the bridge needs to be close to the end of the neck, so of the guitar. So I'm going to take the neck out of the way for now, and you can just pretend like this is the guitar neck. So I'm going to have the bridge somewhere around there, and what I use is flashing for the tailpiece. This is not the tailpiece I would be using, but this is the material, and I bend it over the edge. I'll show you how that works. So the bridge is going to be somewhere around here. This gives me a little bit of wiggle room, so if I need to move the bridge further back or further up, I can do that as needed, because the bridge is what they call a floating bridge. The strings hold the bridge in place. So once I determine where that bridge needs to be, then that's where it's going to be. Depending on if it's out of tune, obviously I need to adjust it either forward or reverse. So you have to kind of play around with it a bit and determine where the bridge is after you put the strings on and after you have the pickup, and that's the last thing that you do pretty much, is determine where the bridge goes. So this right here is simply a tracing of a regular 25.5-inch guitar neck. So that part is pretty straightforward. So the next thing that we need to do here is cut a slot on this end, because that's where this neck is going to stick out, and then we will proceed from there. All right, the next thing I do is determine where the neck is going to be, and that's the neck slot. So I'm going to cut this little piece out, and that's where the neck is going to go into, right there. And it goes into the neck to about right there. So this will be epoxied inside on the lid of the box. All right, I've cut the slot where the neck goes into the box. And the next step here is to remove the felt from the inside, and then I'll glue the neck in right here. All right, the next step is not exactly exciting or not exactly fun. I'm going to be using a router like this one right here, and I'm going to be removing most of this chunk here so that there's only maybe 1/4 of an inch left right here. In other words, everything above my finger will be chopped away, and that is to allow me to put the neck into the box, and it will go into that slot right there. But currently it's too thick. And here is the look at the slot. So it's much thinner, and this is what it looks like on the inside of the lid. So this is where the neck is going to be glued to, about right here. So I'm going to take this paper off, and then I'm going to use the router on the neck. Then we'll glue it in. All right, the neck slot has been cut and measured properly, so the neck will go into that slot right there, and it's going to be epoxied into the lid of the box, just like that. All right, there we go. We've got the neck attached, epoxied in, and this is what it looks like on the underside. And I will put a L bracket underneath here when I'm almost finished with the guitar, and that will pull the neck down maybe a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch, and gives you just a little bit more leeway to raise or lower the strings. I'll explain all that later when we get to that point. All right, here we are with the neck attached and the sound hole installed. Tuners also installed. So a couple more things we need to do, actually more than just a couple. We need to put the pickup inside, obviously. We need to put some weight wood in there so it balances. So let's do the weight wood first, because that's going to determine where the pickup goes. So what I'm going to do is take a couple of pieces of extra wood here that I've got, and we will find the strategic location for where the wood is going to go. Usually the back quadrant right here, and I also put some up here on the front, and that's to weight it like this instead of like this. All right, I have successfully installed the input jack and the volume control. Pretty straightforward, just one screw. I like to have mine about 2 inches apart, 1.5 inches apart, I guess, somewhere around there. Depending on the guitar, I may put the jack here on the rear of the guitar. This is a pretty skinny section here, so for the sake of expediency, I decided to put this one on the top here. So the next thing is the weight wood, and the weight wood balances out the guitar. All right, I've determined where the weight wood is going to be. Obviously, there's always weight wood in the rear because you want it to balance properly. You want the rear end to kind of balance slightly heavier than the neck end. And I put a little bit of extra wood here on this side, so that will also balance it. You don't want only weight wood in the rear. You want a little bit here on this edge, and that way it balances and hangs properly instead of being bottom heavy. It's a little bit more balanced, not 100% balanced, always more weight in the rear. That's what she said. Okay, I put the weight wood in. This will help to balance the guitar, and it definitely will increase the sustain. Sustain. If you can still hear it sustaining. So the next thing to do here is put the pickup in and the electronics. All right, to determine where the bridge is going to be, I have a template for the neck here, and this overlaps exactly where the frets are. So I've got the fret markers on here all the way down the neck. So that determines that the bridge will be right there. So that tells me that this tailpiece will work just fine. Needs to curl over the edge of the rear of the guitar, and that's where the bridge will be. So I will put the tailpiece on. All right, I have the tailpiece installed. I wrapped the strings around those 4 screws, and the bridge piece is going to be somewhere around here. Probably going to be a bolt. Sometimes I use a small piece of wood, such as this. If I can get that in focus. There we go. So it just kind of depends on the height of the bridge, but I can always shave this down if I need to. So it'll probably be somewhere around here. And then I have an L bracket which goes underneath the neck here. I'm going to show you what one of those looks like here. It's a simple bracket that I screw in on the bottom of the neck, right about where it connects to the box. So this is what it looks like. This is a L bracket. It's got the plastic protection stuff on it now. So when you take that off, it's nice and shiny. So this will be on the underside of the neck. What it does is it allows you to tighten or loosen, or in other words, raise or lower the neck just a tiny bit. So the L bracket will go right here. It'll be screwed into the box, and there'll be a small gap there between the bracket and the neck, and I'll put a bolt in that hole right there where my thumb is, and it pulls down the neck just a little bit if you want the strings to be higher off the fretboard, or you can loosen it to where the strings are closer to the fretboard. So you have an option to raise or lower the action that way. And basically you're just turning the screw maybe a quarter of a, or the bolt a quarter of a turn, and it will raise or lower that neck just enough. So this is how the weight wood is oriented. This is just extra wood that I have from building the guitars, and I situated this kind of strangely, but I needed some weight in the rear of the box, so back down in this area, but I also needed weight on the side. This wood right here is not nearly as heavy as the red oak here, so I put that big piece there, and that should balance the guitar just right. You don't want it to be too top heavy where the neck points down to the floor, and you also don't want it to be too rear heavy where the rear end of the guitar points down to the floor. These right here are where I'm going to be screwing the lid in to those holes right there when it's all said and done. So up next is going to be the pickup. The pickup is going to be somewhere around here, and I've already got the volume and the jack in. So onward and upward. Okay, the way I figure out where the pole pieces are, which are right there, I use old-fashioned screws for the pole pieces, and I take a single coil pickup and put it inside the box. All right, so this is the single coil pickup with sawdust all over it, and this will be embedded inside the box, and those 4 pole pieces that you see will be touching the 4 screws, which will transfer the sound. So you're not going to see this pickup at all. All you're going to see is those 4 screws, and that's to preserve the artwork on the box. So the way I figured this out is I measure from this point here, and this point, and this point, straight line to the pickup. And so the strings are going to go right over the pole pieces and wrapped around the screws. We have liftoff, ladies and gentlemen. So here is the pickup. I've marked the pole pieces right here, and those pole pieces are touching on the other side, touching the screws, the 4 screws that I put in, just like so. So that transfers the sound from the string to the pickup underneath the box, inside the box. And I have the volume and the jack wired properly. So we are ready to put the strings on this sucker. All right, here is the final product. I've got the bridge, which actually happens to be a fret. Yes, actually that's not uncommon. So 25.5-inch scale, 4-string, tuned to open G. It's got a great tone. Everything's sounding good. Everything's in tune all the way up the fretboard. I'm using extra light strings. These are 0.09s for the 1st string. Of course, you can use whatever gauge you prefer on my cigar box guitars. The L bracket down here was manipulated just a little bit to pull the neck down, just a little. Pickup works great. There's no hum when you turn down the volume. There you go, folks. Bluesboy Jag, cigar box guitars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.